Stuart Holbrook has spent his life in the world of collectors. As president of Theriault, the world's leader in the auction of antique dolls and figurative art for over 30 years, he's managed the often personal and always wild world of collecting and collectors. His market expertise and knowledge of trends comes to life in The Curious Collector, where he shares his experience and experiences in real-life stories, alongside sage advice on how to build great collections within the happy life of a collector.
Welcome back to The Curious Collector. I'm your host, Stuart Holbrook, and very happy to be here with you today for a whole new genre and podcast format that we're introducing to The Curious Collector, and that is conversations with a collector. You can't listen to me all the time, and gosh knows I ramble on, so I thought we would introduce real conversations, real insight directly from many of the different collectors I know from across the world who can share their experiences and their life in collecting, what it's meant to them, their ups and downs, their wins, their losses, all of the interesting drama behind building these collections and what it's done for them in their lives. These are really positive things that I think are so important on three different levels. For example, new collectors who will be able to listen to the stories of established collectors who've been in this for decades and to hear their ups and downs and all the things they've experienced and perhaps gain some insight that will help them in the future. It can be lonely in the beginning as a new collector, and I think listening to these firsthand experiences will resonate and be so wonderful for them, even for established collectors. I think there's a moment of hearing others' stories and saying, oh my gosh, I relate to that. I get that. I understand that. Or I had a very similar experience as well. And then, of course, I think this is great for the others that stumble onto this podcast to hear the stories of collectors and how collecting has been such a positive and wonderful experience in their life so that you have a better clear connection, maybe to a partner who collects or to a family member to say, you know, now I get it. As I said, you can listen to me talk about it all the time, but it means so much more coming from the actual collectors. And that's what these conversations with a collector, a whole series we're going to be doing, is going to allow for as we continue and evolve it down the road. The first guest we have brought on is somebody I've known for years, and I think is a fabulous, diverse collector who's had so many evolutions and experiences that it was a great way to start for us here at the conversations level and allowing her to tell her very own story. Catherine Peterson, thank you so much for joining us on The Curious Collector and being the first person in my new series of collector conversations. I'm so glad you could join us. And as I said in the intro, we have known each other literally for decades, not to make us both sound older. We're young and still vibrant, but I knew I had to have you because you've not just been a part of the collecting aspect of my life, in which case the auctions, and I've known you since my 20s, and you were in your 20s and collecting. But we've been friends through all this and have grown in our relationship and knowing each other. And so this was the, let's call it the low-hanging fruit of I wanted Catherine on for this first conversation because we get along so well, and I just love you so much. You're an incredible, incredible human being. So thank you for being here today.
Oh, well, thank you for having me. I'm truly honored that you chose me to be the first, and I hope I do it justice.
You will be great. And as I mentioned in the intro, this is a lot about helping others and not only non-collectors, but collectors as well, kind of see all the diversity and the interesting people. No two collectors are alike. And hearing their story is always such an interesting and validating way for people to realize that what they're doing is such a passionate and engaging hobby that is done by so many, as I said, different, diverse people out there. So with that, I'd love to hear, I mean, we're going to talk a lot about your collecting and how dolls came into your life and what they mean to you and how you developed as a collector over the years. But I think it's important to start off with just an understanding of your life in general so people can feel some context to this, a little bit about where you grew up and where things went from there.
Okay, well, as you know, a Southern California girl, grew up there. I grew up being a performer. I started off taking baton twirling lessons. And for those that don't know, back in the 60s, it was huge. Baton twirling was huge. And every weekend was spent in Orange County going to competitions. And then that morphed into joining a marching band at the local city and doing parades and concerts and performances. And then eventually going to the DCI circuit, which is the Drum Corps International. And I was with a group and we traveled all over the United States and Canada performing. I did competitions, gosh, you name it, everywhere. I mean, one summer we traveled cross country and slept in dorms on tennis courts. You name it, we were there. We were on 3 Greyhound Super 7 buses, all 250 of us, and performed for a couple of presidential inauguration parades and spent my life doing that. I also had a passion for, which led into the doll collecting aspect of it, fashion. And I did a lot of modeling and performances that way back in Southern California. And I'm sure they had them elsewhere, but in California, there were several department stores that had tea rooms or dining halls, and they would hire models to model the clothing line for that season. And I did modeling for tea rooms and loved performing and doing that and got lots of jobs. And one of my favorite was what they called mannequin modeling. And we would stand there in the department stores and pretend to be like a mannequin, and people walking by not sure if we were alive or not. And kids poking you. And so
I
had
still
a
see
lot.
these in some of those stores on the streets. Abercrombie and Fitch or whatever. I don't know what that store is. They do this all the time. And then you walk by and you're looking at it, and then all of a sudden it moves and jumps at you. You're like, it does get your attention.
It does. And it was so much fun doing that. So performing has always been a big part of my growing up years. Then as I got older and graduated from college, got married, I had several careers, from legal secretary to managing medical offices and treatment coordinators. And even late in life, decided when my youngest graduated from high school, we went back to college together, and I got a degree in culinary arts and became a chef and worked in some restaurants until COVID hit and had my own catering business for a while. So I've run the gamut, but I've had fun.
Awesome. You have done a lot of different things, and I guess in your careers and in your collecting as well, which we'll talk about. But I got to know, can you still twirl a baton?
I can. I can twirl a rifle, a baton, and a saber.
Can you do them all at once? That's what I want to see. But wait, I don't want to be near you when you twirl a saber. It does intrigue me, though. All right.
It's a niche thing, but if it's changed so much. But if you go back to those 60s and 70s, yeah, the drum corps marching bands was a big thing.
It's a great backstory, I think, to help people see. And you've moved around a lot over the years, starting in California, and you're in South Carolina now.
I know Skip Simon used to say that we were either in the military or on the lam because nobody moved around that much otherwise. But the truth of the matter was my husband's job just took him everywhere. So I would tell people, no, we just followed the paycheck.
That's great. But, with that, we'll talk about it in a little bit. I don't want to jump the gun, but I think it allowed you also to meet so many people out there in the world through collecting across the country. But we'll jump on that later on. So now that we have a little bit of a context of your life and what a fascinating life it's been, from baton twirler to dance instructor to pastry chef, let's talk about your collecting life and how dolls came in. Because one of the things I've always found fascinating about you is, you probably heard me talk about before, that most collectors really come into what I would call active collecting in their 50s or 60s. I mean, it comes typically later in life. And yet you are one of the outliers, one of the few that really started young. So can you kind of take us back from childhood and where that morphed into collecting and tell us a little bit about that?
Well, my very first doll was a Raggedy Ann doll that I received on my first birthday. And from all reports, it was my bosom buddy, and I carry that doll everywhere. And I see pictures where it morphed into, I was 2 or 3 when I got a baby deer doll. And you see where my fascination and my love of baby dolls, an obsession with those, came in from that, feeding and changing and pushing that doll around. But The real influence was my grandmother giving me a Madame Alexander doll every year for my birthday and for Christmas. And so accumulated those early on, and the fascination of having those dolls, because as you know, back in the day, Madame Alexanders were hard to come by. She was very selective in which stores had to apply to actually be able to sell her dolls. And so getting a storybook doll was a big deal because those were hard to come by back in the day. So it was always the excitement of getting a doll early on.
And probably your grandmother initiated the collector aspect of the doll because I'm sure, as you said, they were so hard to get. She was probably giving them to you and saying, don't cut the hair. Don't throw away the box. Don't play with this doll like you do your other dolls. These are meant to be enjoyed and relished really in display. Is that the case?
Not really. In fact, I still have my Alice in Wonderland doll I got as a child, and you can tell I really played with her. But my grandmother was also instrumental in giving me my Barbies. And she made all of my Barbie doll clothes along with the ones that I got periodically as gifts. But the majority of the wardrobe, because Barbie, you'd be able to get the patterns, and she was such a great sewer, she would actually make and replicate the Barbie clothes for me. And I had an extensive collection from that. And other women, I'm sure, have experienced this. I matured really early. At 11, I looked like I was 15 or 16. I had developed and looked a way lot older. And my mother was, you're way too old to play with dolls. Well, I'm only 11 or 12. I wasn't too old. And basically, my grandmother said, not on my watch. She still can have dolls if she wants to have dolls. And so she kept giving me the dolls to play with. So she was huge in that respect. And in fact, she gave me a doll every Christmas and every birthday until the day she died. And I was in my late 30s.
Wow.
It was just a tradition with her. And in fact, when I had moved on from collecting Alexanders and had gotten older, when I had my first granddaughter, I gave her those same dolls for her birthday and Christmas every year and passed on that tradition. So from my grandmother to me, from me being as a grandmother to my granddaughter.
It's such a formative age. Yeah, I've noticed this with a lot of collectors who, when you trace back to their childhood, and when they come into what I call active collecting, may vary, but they all seem to have something connected to childhood in those formative years of, say, 3 years old to 12 years old, where somebody has been instrumental in their lives in teaching them about beautiful objects, encouraging a collecting without even knowing they're collecting, or even just exposing them to museums and antique shops and that whole world out there. That critical period is what leads into collecting in later life. It develops a respect for them. And I can see your grandmother really had a huge influence on you becoming a collector later on.
My grandmother was a huge collector. Back in the 80s, she was on the forefront of the teddy bear collecting field and put out a teddy bear newsletter back in the day. And so her collecting is what encouraged my collecting of it, even though I didn't really consider myself a collector until my 20s. I just happened to have this group of dolls, but I don't think collectors so much came into play until my 20s. Yeah, she was very much instrumental into that up until my 20s, until I met other people through church, a girlfriend of mine who introduced me to antique dolls. And that was a whole other opening of doors.
That's so interesting. And you've welcomed me into your home, so I've actually seen the picture of you as a young girl with a Raggedy Ann, which you still have hanging in your home. And you still have the Raggedy Ann, too, I believe, don't you there?
Yeah, there's a picture of me sitting on the kitchen table with the birthday cake and holding Raggedy Ann and the teddy bear, the baby deer book, and I have everything in that picture from the dress I'm wearing to the shoes I have on. I have it all grouped together as just kind of a little thing. Yeah, and I hope someday when I'm gone that it'll be something that some Raggedy Ann collector will appreciate, having the provenance of everything in that picture.
It's a great collector of Catherine Peterson. This was her personal one. Well, the thing everybody loved when we sold Shirley Temple's auction, they loved her Raggedy Ann and the picture of her holding it. So in my book, you're right up there with Shirley Temple. So,
Oh, well, thank you. But yeah, I know provenance is important. And I know every auction I've ever gone to, anytime there's a picture with the doll, everybody wants it because they want to be able to say, yeah,
sure.
this is the doll with the girl. There's just something about that.
Oh, absolutely. So you got into your 20s, and this is when you feel like this is the changeover
This is
where
definitely the
you,
changeover. I was about
okay.
21 and I had made some girlfriends at this church we were attending, and we happened to be at her house, and none of the three of us even knew we were doll collectors for whatever reason. And Karen says, "Oh, you guys want to see what I just got?" And she goes back into the back room and she pulls out this antique doll. And my mouth just fell open. I had no idea you could actually buy these, that they existed to be able to purchase this. And she's like, "You
Mm,
don't know about doll shows?" And I'm like, "No." So it just opened the floodgates. And about that same time, there was a little ad in the local newspaper about a talk on antique dolls given by the Verdugo Hills Doll Club at the little local library.
oh,
I
one of the
went to that.
early original clubs. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that was Patricia Gosh was president at the time,
Hmm.
Pam
Right.
Candell, Karen Rockwell, Susan Foreman, Janet Hollingsworth. I mean, big
You had
players,
big
big
names.
names.
Right.
Yeah, and I'm just this young little 21-year-old girl and Susan Foreman was a race car driver and this tall, blonde, statuesque, long blonde hair.
Hmm.
And, I was like, wow, I was just in awe of this woman and opened up this whole new world to me. I really attribute that to changing my life. Literally
Hmm.
changing my life, not just doll collecting, because it opened up a whole new world I had never before known it even existed.
Yeah, it's so interesting back then in that period, pre-internet age, and you're looking at now. We're in the 1980s, I think. Is that correct?
Yes,
Yeah. So in that
81.
1980s, it was people that really influenced
Mhm.
directly through doll clubs and doll shows and auctions, people that you met and became
Right.
your mentors in a way. And you talked about some pretty significant names out there. Susan Foreman, for sure, and still alive and still doing fantastic and actively collecting. And she's somebody I have to get on the podcast as well, because who wouldn't love to know that there is a doll collector who's a race car driver or a former race car driver?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they
So,
took me under their wing and
mhm,
taught me and encouraged me. It was like baptism by fire, that doll club, because it
mhm,
was the
mhm,
Powerhouse Doll Club of California who put out the Pink Book, which they still do, held a doll show every January. And, I was up there in the big leagues of the collecting
mhm,
world
mhm.
and of people who were involved in UFDC. And it was a hardworking club. So you
Right.
were down in the trenches and learning the ropes and how to be a collector, who were the collectors, the ins and outs. And yeah, I couldn't have asked for a better club to start off my world
Yeah.
of doll collecting.
You certainly give a shout out to how doll clubs can be such an important part of the development of a young collector. Now, a lot of doll collectors, as I said, really don't come into it in their 50s. So the new member might be in their 40s and 50s, but you were in your 20s. And their willingness to embrace you in this and respect you as a person, even though you were a 22-year-old and really didn't have any, let's put it in quotations, important dolls at that point, they welcomed
Oh
you.
my God. Oh my gosh. No. In
Yeah.
fact, I wasn't even 21 at the time. My daughter's like 6 months old. I had nothing. I had Madame Alexander dolls and I think maybe an Alexander Campo doll was the oldest doll I had in my collection at the time. And this
Mm,
was back in the day when doll clubs, you had to like apply to join to the doll club. And you can
right.
imagine a club like Verdugo Hills where they had two members come to your home, check
The
you out,
inspectors,
the
the
inspectors to see your
inspectors, I always
collection.
call them. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'm hearkening
Yeah.
back to a time where they don't do this anymore, but talk about pressure and what they saw in me and my miserable little doll collection and let me in. And then 3 years later, made me president and sent me off to my first convention. And I mean, I'm telling you, these women just whipped me into shape early on
Oh,
to train me.
that's a wonderful story. And what it inspired to you, and we'll talk about it, it developed one of the great collectors of America that you've become. And it shows what I've been saying before, that when you have young people embracing this hobby, don't judge what they collect, meet them where they are. Inspire them,
Exactly.
encourage them, and let them develop over time. They will. And so you are standing proof to this, that there are gateways for yours. They were simple Alexanders, but that would lead to something so much bigger. And this was the moment, I guess, that you really said, you defined, and you came out and declared to the world, I am a doll collector.
I am a doll collector.
I mean, in your 20s back then, I'm really curious, what was it like to declare that you were a doll collector?
Well, it was interesting. I know we've talked about this on a personal level about how even as a performer, I'm still very shy and introverted. Most people will go like, yeah, no way. But really, truly, I am. If I'm in the element of what I'm doing, performing, I can do the performance part of it. But in personal life, unless I'm comfortable in a situation, I don't really put myself out there. And so being in a doll club and having to become president and go to shows, I talk about this all the time. You were actually one of the people that changed my ability and how I collected and how I went about collecting. Early on, one of your seminars, you talked about basically developing relationships, putting yourself out there and developing relationships. Well, early on, being a shy, young 20-something-year-old, I'd go to these doll shows, I'd look, I'd shop, I'd leave. And then after you said that, I thought, oh, I never really thought about I should be talking to the dealers, talking to other people that go there. It just never occurred to me that maybe they'd want to talk to me. So when I started doing that and developing the relationships, that changed everything. You know, it's just a growth period. And you need that, developing that relationship of putting yourself out there, going to these seminars, going to the shows, going to auctions, and meeting so many people. Yeah, the relationships are everything.
Who were some of the early formative people that really inspired you back then? I mean, you mentioned Sue Foreman and your doll club. Were there other people that you met along the way that really did become mentors to you in this young age?
Patricia Gosh. For years.
A great one.
She just was amazing to me and always talking to me, asking, what are you collecting? What are you interested? She always took an interest in what I was doing because at that period of time, French dolls were everything, but I didn't really care for them. I know people are like, you'd hear the gasp across the internet. But my passions, I always liked the early dolls, and China dolls were always my thing. But because French dolls were the tour de force and, you know, the hot thing at the time, what everybody was collecting, and I was intimidated and shy, and I didn't know a whole lot. So you're looking to these people to kind of what you're leading. And I started off collecting things I shouldn't have and being influenced instead of going for what I liked. But Patricia and Pam Candell also would say to me, you know what? You're an advanced collector and you don't even know it. They would tell me, just collect what you like. Don't worry about it. And that's one of the hardest things to do as a new collector, is to trust what you like and not worry about the trends, not worry what everybody else is collecting.
It is. And back then it was, you know, pre-internet, and everybody was in the doll shows. Everybody was at the auctions, and there was chatter all the time. And they would see a young collector and come up and tell you, oh, you don't want that. You don't want that. That's not good enough for you. And I know one collector that was 16 and was at an auction in Pennsylvania and saw an Isana Walker and just fell in love with it. And somebody came up and said, oh, honey, don't bid on that. That arm is all torn apart. You don't want that. And she was terrified and she didn't buy it. And that doll has haunted her since. She still looks for it. But you were surrounded by good people who gave you positive information and positive energy, like Patricia Gosh. And that LA group, the Southern California group, really people didn't know, but in the 80s, it was the center of the universe in doll collecting, really. There were so many great names out of there. And it started off early. I mean, there were great collectors in LA in the 1920s, 30s, and 40s. So you were at the heyday, and that really shaped you. So
it really did.
Tell me a little bit, Catherine, how would you describe what you collect to someone who doesn't know much about antique dolls? Not the category, but explain to me what you look for, where your collecting evolved to eventually, say in your 30s, 40s, and when your collecting kind of really began to take off. But explain to me the quality, the feeling, the thing you're actually chasing here.
Well, that significantly changed over the years. What I collected early in my 20s compared to 30, 40s, I don't feel like I really came into my own until my 50s, to
Okay.
where I really honed in and focused and curated and went for the doll that really, what do you say, the dolls that sing to your heart, the ones that just, you feel like, I really don't care what anybody else, this is my passion, this is what I'm looking for. I hit my stride, I think, in my 50s.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so you talked about this in one of your podcasts. I look for the dolls with the story. And
Mm-hmm.
people have accused me of, well, a couple of people say, well, you like the ugly dolls. Well, they're not the ugly dolls. They're the unusual dolls, the dolls with character, the dolls with a story behind it. I don't collect the perfect doll. I would rather have a doll with a little bit of damage, but there's provenance behind it. There's a story
Mm-hmm.
behind it. There's something that draws you in. The collections I love to look at and what I strive to have for are when people look in my cabinet, they want to look farther in.
Mm-hmm.
It draws them in. They just don't
Mm-hmm.
scoop over and just see a bunch of faces, a bunch of dolls just lined up. There's something about
Right.
it when people see my collection, they're poking around and say, well, what is that? Does that belong? How did, there's more to than just, oh, that's a pretty doll, or I like her dress, or, look at that hat. There's more to what's there than just a pretty face.
Do you think your collection went where you expected it to, or were you shocked in your 50s what you were looking for and what you were collecting compared to 15, 20 years before?
Yes. Not shocked so much, but please, there's just something about when you hit your 50s personally, professionally,
Mm-hmm.
in your hobby where you kind of hit your stride, where you no longer
Mm-hmm.
care what everybody else is doing and you come into yourself. It just finally it clicked. So I started going for things that most people wouldn't go for. And I just got so much joy at it that it fueled finding other things. And it became, you always had the thrill of the hunt before, but there
Mm-hmm.
was a
Mm-hmm.
renewed vigor into that thrill because I knew what I was really searching for.
It's interesting because, as I said before, most collectors start in their 50s, but you're starting off in your 20s allowed you more
To make
time to
mistakes.
develop. Yeah, to make mistakes. Okay, you said it. Let's just get it out.
Hey, yeah, we make
But for sure,
mistakes. We all start off
absolutely.
with when you first discover antique dolls, it's like every doll's crying as you say, Mama, take me
Right,
home,
right, right.
save me. And part of it is too that you really, for the most part, very few people have a focus in their collection when they first start out. They know where they're going, what they want, and have that lasered in pinpoint. Yeah, I don't deviate. Most of us
Mm-hmm.
start off getting a little bit of everything, because, this looks good, or you go in an auction, you go to a doll show and you buy what we used to call piddly. We go
Mm-hmm.
home with something and, or
Right.
we get our consolation dolls. You like to talk about it. We don't put the money away for
Mm-hmm.
the war chest so that you really get what you want. And, I think that's important too in some ways because you need to get that out of your system. It's like dating. You got to try on a few before you pick the right one,
Absolutely. You got
You
to
know?
kiss a few frogs before you find the prince and
Right.
for or buy a few bilos. Oh gosh, I'm
No,
making fun
don't,
of bilos again. I
no,
swear I would never do that. Okay. So,
not buy
but
the clumpy dolls. The clumpy doll. That was
okay,
always your
clumpies. Oh,
go-to.
that was my good one. Okay,
That
clumpies.
was
All
your
right.
go-to. But
So,
yeah, we all go in little tangents here or there. We're buying things that look interesting, or it was the best thing at the show maybe, or
mhm,
you pick it up at
right,
the local flea
right.
market, garage sale because it was cheap and it was affordable, what you could get. There's a myriad of reasons why you pick up what you pick
Hmm.
up. One of my early doll friends, I remember lamenting one time that, oh, I'll never be able to afford to buy a brew. And she kind of bee-slapped me and said, yeah, you could. And I'm like, what are you talking about? She says, if you didn't buy that, and add it together,
Hmm.
you could have had a brew.
Right.
And it was a real rude awakening that, yeah, I'm no better than those people that say, oh, I can't afford an antique doll when I look at the piddly that you bought. And if you hadn't bought this, or this, you couldn't afford that
Well,
antique doll.
exactly, exactly.
It's about
It's yeah.
disciplining yourself.
Exactly. And that era of the 80s and 90s was very undisciplined in a lot of cases in collecting. And it was the generation of collectors where whoever has the most dolls in the end wins. Doesn't matter what they are.
Exactly.
So it was a different time for sure. But one of the things I think the takeaway is, just going back a few minutes in the conversation in this, is I've always said there's no university of doll collecting you can go to, and that ultimately your education and process, they are making those mistakes. And it's okay. And
someone once said to me, don't worry about the mistakes. You sell them, you move them, you get rid of it, because you would have paid a lot more to go to college to learn that.
Exactly. So this is the truth. So the messaging on this too, if you're a new collector, Catherine is telling you through her experiences that this is okay. Now, she was lucky. She made those mistakes when she was younger. So by the time she got to her 50s, where the money is a little bit more accessible and maybe your drive for quality is there, you've already gone through that process. But even if you start in your 50s, you make a few mistakes, it's okay. It's all good.
Yeah.
You're going to get there. Yeah. And just use it as some of the things you can laugh at later on and that you learn from.
Right.
Is there a doll, Catherine, in your collection? Because you were talking about that you really migrated to liking the unusual, and you were a forerunner in this. I'm going to say this really because in that 80s and 90s period, the classics were the driving force in the market. Everybody migrated to the classics. And the fringe dolls, early paper maches and wax and wood and things like that, yes, they had a following. Yes, they had interest, and they had a level of sophisticated collectors who were after them. People like Winnie and Dorothy, as an example, name I'm sure you recognize and know, two collectors. But most of the market was, as you said, the French, the German characters, all of these. But you identified these niche areas of early pieces, interesting items, I like to call them, esoteric. And you recognize them early, and that's really formed a big part of your collecting over these years. So I got to know, is there one thing in your collection that you know that people just walk right past? They don't even look at because it's so kind of odd, but you consider it one of the finest in your collection, and why?
Yeah, until I point her out, they do, because she just looks like a little, tiniest little, she's like maybe 3.5 inches tall. She's a little China half doll. But until you part her skirt, you don't know what's under there. She's my favorite doll in my collection. She's my favorite. Well,
I don't think I want to pursue any more information on this. But
no.
It's she. Idea, yeah.
She would be considered a naughty or a body, like BAWDY, however you want to say.
Body, yes, body.
Body doll. You open her up, her little skirt, and her nether regions are very anatomically correct and painted as such. But she has her arms folded. She's a little ballerina doll with the most delicate painted ballet shoes on, and her arms are folded. And she has the most serene expression on her face. She has a molded, extended bun in her hair. The rarity of this doll, the history behind this doll, when you think about the fact that she survived, because she wasn't a child's doll, that's for sure. She wasn't something women in the 1850s would have collected. It was something that's been theorized that would have been sold in cigar shops for men to have. She was a pen wipe with all the sexual connotations that go along with that. And people would just walk by. So unless somebody happens to stop and say, oh, how tiny, how pretty, and then I start going into the story behind her, people really wouldn't know. And she's the doll that just makes me smile. I think of, I don't know, kind of a level of connection with this doll from, I feel like everything that she survived, what she's witnessed, what she was intended for, what she was meant for, what she was used for, and how she survived all of that kind of correlates to things that I've survived in my life. And I feel like that serene smile on her face every time I walk by and I see her, she's telling me, I've survived, you've survived, we got this. It's just, she's just great.
That's an incredible story. And it's something that I think a lot of people would walk by in your collection and miss, but probably a doll that tells one of the greatest stories, as you said. We both know the great collector Karen Cheek. And I've always been interested, as you just related to, that her drive for collecting and what she loves tends to be correlated more towards women's studies than childhood. And this is a perfect example in the history of women and the struggles of women And
Right.
that doll represents so many different levels of stories. And some of them are not uplifting, some can be heartbreaking. And yet it's still telling a story of our past. And I get, Catherine, you've come a long way, baby, as the old sayings come. And that doll
Yeah.
definitely signifies that.
It wouldn't necessarily for other people, but because of my life story and some of the experiences I've had that I could correlate similar trajectory. And, and like I said, because she's so tiny, she's not as noticeable
Mm-hmm.
as the other big dolls or what people would look to see. So it's fun having had her around for all these years. And I only know of maybe 2 or 3 that even exist. So on a rarity level, it doesn't get any better than that. So
wait a minute. You make fun of me for saying rare too much, and now you just said it. So I'm bringing it full circle back to you. But it is definitely rare. So on that note, Catherine, tell me, when you pick up a doll for the first time, when you look at a doll for the first time, what are you looking for? What is the connection? What do you think it comes from?
It depends on the doll. Now, if you remember a few years back after Ugat Clark's auction, we were talking about, I did a little response to a posting that you had on the internet, and I spoke about the feel of a doll. And it's got that Goldilocks feel where it's the right size.
You called it, if I can remind you, because I quoted you on this ever since then, because I think it's one of the most beautiful explanations out there. You called it the weight of a doll.
The weight of a doll. Yes. So sometimes depending on the doll, and that's with a china or a paper mache or even a wax, and even the Bis doll, like that one that I wanted from the auction, it just has that certain feel, that weight of the doll that you just know. And sometimes you can just almost feel electricity come through your hands, that there's like this connection. And other times it's the history, the provenance, the story behind it, like the little pinwipe doll that I just spoke of. There's got to be more than just a pretty face and a pretty dress for me. Those are a dime a dozen. And in fact, Florence is what helped me get to that trajectory in collecting. Going back to one of the seminars, she was talking about, don't just look at the doll and see the pretty face or the pretty dress. If you took that dress and that hat off the doll, would you still buy it? Would she still be worth it to you? And so the same thing there. I look past the obvious attraction to the doll. I start dissecting. Would this doll still be the doll? But there's other reasons I have bought dolls over the years, because I'm all about the clothing, and if we touch on this later in our talk here, but for me, collecting the clothes are everything in the history of the doll. And you see my collection. Every doll has to have the correct period dress, and it has to fit. It just can't be a dress on the doll. It has to look like that dress was made for that doll.
Textiles are, you hear me saying it, really textiles luckily have become such an integral part of the experience of doll collecting, because they represent fashion through the ages and part of the joy of what you're experiencing and the cultural protection of different eras. And you have long recognized this, which is astounding, because you came out of that 80s and 90s older era of collecting where it was less important. The face tended back then to be the main thing, but you saw that textiles are the future of collecting dolls.
Once again, it goes back to Florence. Another seminar. She said, buy the dress, the doll will come. You can get a doll anywhere. She said, but the old clothing is hard to get. And I took that to heart. For years, while everybody else was rushing to opening night of sales room, they were hitting all the big dealer booths and everything. I was heading to Rob Wynn and scooping off his countertop of the clothing. There have been plenty of doll shows and conventions where I've come home with nothing but clothing. And another person I attributed this to is Gail Cook. I was so influenced, not by her collection, which is fabulous. Don't get me wrong, but under her cabinet, she pulled open drawers and the drawers, shoes. And she said the same thing. I buy the doll. I don't worry about how it's dressed, because she would go home and go shopping for it. And so I started that trend. I lamented for years because I would see these dolls with the trunks in the wardrobe, and I remember sitting through Blondinette and thinking, oh my gosh, to have a doll that had all that extensive trousseau. And I knew it was going to never be in my range to do that. It just was a reality of our financial circumstances, sitting after auction. So I figured, you know what? I may not be able to buy one put together, but I could eventually get one put together. And so one of the things I bought early on was the most beautiful roamer I could find. And that was back in the day when everybody was hooray, 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 long before roamers started to take off. I was into roamer dolls, and I have several in my collection, all the different types of roamers that were put out. But I found one of the most beautiful roamers I've ever seen. And she did happen to come with a trunk and a minimal wardrobe that I had to trade a bunch of other things to get her, but that's another story. But before that, I knew I was going to get a roamer doll because I just loved those dolls. And I learned about roamer clothing. Roamer made clothing the same way Hooray made their clothing. They just didn't label them. But their clothing fit the 15-inch doll the same way Hooray's fit the Hooray body dolls. And I trained my eye. I could see those dresses, and I found people that would buy these dresses or be selling them, and they would say, oh, I bought this for my Hooray, and it just didn't fit right. And I go, that's a roamer dress. And so I collected roamer dresses for years until I found the roamer that was the doll. And then I had her ready to rock and roll.
Had her ready for the evenings in Paris. And
that's right. So when Fanny came home, she had that trousseau, and I spent years buying accessories and things for her. And that has just been the joy of my last 15, 20 years of collecting.
Well, you talk about your love of roamers. There's another thing that I happen to know you love, and a particular subject of dolls that you became fixated on years ago. And I've always teased you about your bidding on them at auction. Tofflings, yeah, tofflings. Florence doesn't allow me to use the term Machmans, so unless I say so-called Machmans. But yes, Machmans as so-called or tofflings. And I've always said there isn't a toffling out there in the world that you don't love. What is it about tofflings?
You know, I don't know. Well, I loved mechanical dolls for whatever reason. They just intrigued me. I think because, once again, they're the oddballs. They're the things that people don't usually see, and I just find them fascinating. Dolls are playthings and toys, but that they kind of combine the two. And the history behind that, they were watchmakers that made these mechanisms. There was just so much. I'm a big history buff. So anytime I can go off on tangents and other things, but there's just something very sweet. So anytime I can find them, because they're usually hidden, that people don't even realize they're there. They have bellows or they have the squeaker in there. And
they're small. You talk about the weight of a doll. They're small, a lot of them. Some are big, but many of them are tiny that fit in the palm of your hand.
I think I have one of the largest tofflings out there, that 24-inch one that normally they come in baby sizes, but this one's like a toddler. And then she's holding a little smaller one. But the toffling has her own toffling doll.
You've been collecting them all. I mean, you are the queen of tofflings. Can I tell the story, Catherine, about the one at the auction?
Oh, there's so many stories at Mia auctions.
The one where I made you cry.
Oh, yeah, that's the best story.
And it was a toffling, yeah. I never forget this moment because I'm used to being on the receiving end of anger from people bidding at the auction and not getting it. But I was completely taken aback when I looked down and you couldn't go anymore in this one toffling that we had, and you started crying.
I'd never seen you stumble before.
I was completely stumbled. Now I know what I would say. It's the line from Tom Hanks in A League of Their Own. You remember that movie about the women's baseball
there's no
league?
Crying in doll bidding.
There's no crying in baseball. There's no crying at auctions. Stop this crying. Come on. There's only one thing, victory. I was just torn when I saw you, and it really affected me.
It was so humiliating on so many levels because I was really close to your staff that was there. You always have the best staff, but there were people back there that I had looked over that doll. They all knew I wanted that doll. They were watching me bid because it was fast and furious on the floor. This was back in the day where you filled up a freaking ballroom full of people at the January auction. Exactly. And the phone bidder finally dropped out. It was just me and the woman up front. And then when I burst into tears, and it was just kind of like an emotional release more than I was upset that I'd lost the doll. And then Becky Moncrief is sitting beside me going, oh my gosh, he's crying. And then your staff is going, oh my gosh, he's crying. And you're stumbling. And I thought, and then it turned out that she only wanted the doll for the stupid little Borrelais hat that I was going to sell. And it turned out I could have given her the hat and I could have the doll for thousands less. Oh my gosh. It was just the perfect storm of things. But yeah, and then
we can laugh about it now. But I think it was an important education for me. I think it was one of the many moments that helped me understand the emotional context that these pieces have. I say this in a positive way, positive emotions that people have and the connection to these items. And you, in your heart, you saw that piece and you wanted to protect it. And you wanted to bring it to its place in your home, but you wanted to protect it for future generations. You felt the need to do that, and you didn't get it. And it's sometimes hard.
I mean, I was going way over what I had budgeted. I was facing the wrath of my husband when he found out how much I was spending. But the worst part is that for years I took heat for that. The next auction, when another one came up in July, you're like, "Are you sure you're not going to cry? Are you?
You're not going to cry, are you?" I know.
No, I'm good. I'm good.
Crying at auctions. So on that subject, I'm really curious. I don't think that we've ever really talked about this before. Do you feel tension between loving these objects and then watching the market on things that maybe you bought years ago for far less suddenly take off and they're bringing a lot more? Do you feel a tension? Do you feel like it's left the purity of it for you? Or do you say to yourself, I'm so happy to see other people respecting these now, even if they are bringing so much more money?
It depends on the doll and the day.
Yeah.
It really does. I mean, sometimes I could be more generous depending on where it's going to and what the doll is. I mean, yeah, I'll not deny there have been some times where it's just been heartbreaking. And there have been times where financially I was able to go and still not get it. And you're like, geez, Louise, no matter how far I seem to finally get there, the market just still outpaces me. But at the same time, we've talked about this before, where there have been instances where I've gone to an auction specifically for a doll, not getting it, and as luck would have it, a couple of years later, it shows back up, and I got it for far less than what it went for the first time. I know those are rarities, but I've learned over the years that, things happen for a reason. If it's meant to be yours, it'll come around, or something equal will come into your life, or something different that will make up for it.
Is there that one that got away?
There is, and it wasn't at auction necessarily. I've learned to take those hits, but the one at a doll show, I had the opportunity to get this really rare doll, and I didn't know enough. I did not know enough, and I didn't trust my gut. My gut was hesitating, I don't know, and I passed. And I regretted that ever since. So fast forward to an auction that happened not too long ago, and the same type of doll came up, even better than the one before. And unfortunately, it went way beyond, and trust me, I went way past what I had originally budgeted for to try and get that doll. But circumstances as they were, I was unable to get it. And yeah, it just means that for whatever reason, that doll just wasn't meant to be mine, and I just get to enjoy it from that person's collection. And it's in a collection that I'll be able to see it at some point and enjoy it. And probably in hindsight, it's better with my chocolate lab that she likes to munch on things that it's not out where Gracie can get it.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a beautiful and mature approach from the perspective of collecting. But I also say that, Catherine, you've heard me say this to you, and people have heard me say it on the podcast, that my blessing to every collector is may there always be certain things out there that you never get, because ultimately that's what drives you forward in collecting. That's what keeps you in the game, keeps you wanting and yearning for something else and to evolve as a collector. So I don't necessarily say that maybe you'll never see that doll again. Maybe it will come up. You never know. If you don't stay in the game,
well, there's a matching doll to that little pen wipe I told you, the ballerina. There is a bald monk that is her companion piece. And I have had dealers and friends searching, and I have said, you see it, buy it. I'll just pay whatever they ask. I've just been searching for that doll forever. And I hope at some point it will come along. And you're right. There's always things you pass on, you hope you see again. And I've just chalked it up over the years to things happen for a reason. Things will come into your life. And I've had some really exciting pieces of my collection that I never thought I'd ever own, that they'd be out of reach, or those are the kind of things that you only saw in museums. Those things didn't actually ever show up in a show.
When one door closes, another one opens. You just nailed it. That, in a nutshell, is the joy of collecting.
I never thought I'd ever be able to afford a Huret China doll without some miracle falling. And that goes back to developing relationships. There was a dealer a long time California dealer, and I won't name names because in case she doesn't want the people to know it was her, but we'd known each other a long time. And I jokingly said, yeah, I've been dating your Huret for a couple of years now, because every time I go into the booth, I see it. I covet that Huret china. And she's like, Catherine, we've known each other a long time. What can we do to make this happen? And I said, layaway, whatever. And I said, I don't even think I could do a layaway. She says, well, what do you have in your collection? Let's make a trade. And I said, well, I have some fashion dolls I'd be willing to part with. She says, good. And the show happened to be close enough to home where it was a NADA show, actually. And I went home and I grabbed a couple of things that I thought she'd be interested in and came back the next day, showed her. She says, yep, I'm good. She couldn't sell that doll because of the price point it was. She says, but I can sell these fashion dolls in a heartbeat. And I saw her a few months later. She says, I've sold every one of those dolls within 60 days and got my money, and I couldn't sell this doll. So she was sitting on a lot of money she couldn't get sold. So my point is relationships, long-term relationships with dealers, with friends. That little pen wipe came from a friend who had sent out an email showing her new acquisition. And I said, oh my gosh, if you ever decide you're going to sell this doll, please let me know. And she said, no, they're going to kick the dirt over me in this doll. I'll never sell this doll. Less than 6 months later, I got an email, are you still interested? And she sold me the doll. There were a couple friends of mine that we've jokingly had over the years that anytime we see a doll in any one of our collections that we've fallen in love with, we always say, put a sticky under there with my name on it. And that's where the relationships come in. If you ever need to sell a doll, right away who you can call.
Yeah, it goes to the old saying, if you don't ask, the answer is always no. It never hurts to throw things out there. Throw spaghetti against the wall along the line.
Some people find that offensive, but we've been friends for a long time, and you just say, in all seriousness, if you ever decide. So several wonderful pieces I've got from collectors calling me up and saying, years ago, you said you were interested. Are you still in? Oh, yeah. And here it comes.
Right. I personally think it's a great thing. You are giving wonderful advice. If there's any new collectors listening to this, I think what is so great about these collector conversations is the ability for you to relate to people your firsthand experience. I can talk about it all day long on all the podcasts, and God knows I do. But coming from you as a collector has a very sincere and real life lived experience behind it that I think resonates even stronger with new collectors in taking this advice. So if you are new to collecting, go back and even listen to this again and listen to Catherine and some of her experiences on this, because I think it will help you greatly, not only from the validation standpoint, but just the acceptance of this is how it generally works. And what you're telling, Catherine, is the story of a lot of collectors, really, and the similar experiences, the shared experiences. So this is fantastic.
Most of us don't have the funds, the average collector.
Right.
Like you said, until maybe you get older, the kids are gone, you got the discretionary income. But even with the discretionary income that came later on, you aren't always able to get them at the doll shows. They're outpriced at doll shows, or they're outpriced at auction when you're bidding, because you're competing against the world in the auction world, so to speak. So the wisdom I want to impart is it's the relationships and the friendships that I've made over the years that's really helped me to develop and acquire those pieces that were behind the scenes. I've made relationships overseas with dealers who know what I like, and they get a hold of things and they'll shoot me a DM and say, I've got this. Are you interested, before I put it out for the show, and gotten things that way. So relationships.
Yeah. Speaking of relationships, and this is a question that I think is also good, and you're very good at freely talking about how dolls have connected throughout your life and the experiences that you've had with them. And so I think this is helpful for new collectors as well in what to expect going forward. And everybody's different, but I'm curious how your spouse, partners, close friends, different people along the way in your life have responded to your collecting. Did you find resistance, or have you been lucky enough to find support along the way? Because I think this is an important topic that we don't address as a community enough.
Wow. My grandmother early on, as we talked about before, nothing from my parents. They were like, oh, really? You're spending your money on that? My first husband, no. Second husband, not until probably the last 10, 15 years. Kids didn't care. It was just something
Hmm.
mom did. Friends outside of the doll world didn't get it, thought it was like, okay. So I'm so grateful for the doll community, especially like we
Hmm.
talked about how we move so much. If it
Hmm.
wasn't for UFDC, the doll clubs, and the great group of friends I've had in the doll world, I wouldn't have had that community. And so,
Hmm.
stressing again how important being in a club, whether it's a physical, online, some kind of doll community where you have people to talk to that don't go glassy eyed if you start talking to them if they're not really
Hmm. Hmm.
interested in it, because it is a little different. I guess same way of people probably get that if they're real into comic books or baseball cards. People can
Hmm.
appreciate it for what it is, and that's nice. But it's been a long road of lonely in the personal aspect, except for the dolls. So I
Hmm.
was real grateful for that, that I traveled a lot. You know, my husband, because of his job, we had a bunch of airline points, which allowed me to
Hmm.
be able to fly and go to NADA or go to an
Hmm.
auction whenever I wanted to, or UFDC conventions to get several times a year
Hmm.
to the doll community, which I was very grateful for because there were several times that I lived in what I call a doll desert because I was
Hmm.
literally in the desert when I lived in southern Utah. And the closest club was 4.5, 5 hours away in any direction.
Wow. Wow.
And for the first time in my life, I had to be a member at large. And I felt so lost and so disjointed, from it
Hmm.
because I couldn't get to shows unless I flew, or it was a 5 or 6 hour drive, which wasn't always feasible. I still had a child at home. I had to take care of him. My husband was traveling so much; it was just me
But it's so
at
interesting,
home.
Catherine, because I know you personally, and you're similar to me in that people are always shocked that we're not really extroverts. But here you are, you're talking about clubs and that whole social atmosphere of it. What about doll collecting allows this to fit that you become almost an extrovert?
Well, as that book we shared and we read together about, and we
Hmm.
discovered we're what they call now otroverts, where
Hmm.
people who are shy, but when we're in a situation in small gatherings that we're comfortable in and we're knowledgeable in, or we're in a performance situation, we come out of our shells.
Hmm.
And the clubs, you have an automatic in because you know people are interested in the same things that you are. If you move to
Hmm.
a new neighborhood, it takes a while to fit in with your neighbors, make new friends, and meet a new church community or whatever it is. It takes months, if not years, to establish yourself. Where in the doll community, immediately. And if you've been in the doll world, I mean, like I said, I joined UFTC when it was 1981. So do the math, 45, 46 years going on now.
Hmm.
You've
Hmm.
been in the game that long, you really get to know a lot of people. I've been there a long time, met a lot of people, and you're working on committees and involved in UFC, whether it's judging or clerking or setting up exhibits, or just sitting next to somebody at an event dinner or luncheon. You meet new people, and the advent of the internet changed everything, doll collecting, in a big way. Not only the social aspect of it, but the way we collected, the way we were able to purchase dolls, and the market itself. Dolls that used to be considered rare or hard to find, all of a sudden we realized, oh my gosh, dolly dolls in Bilos are a dime a dozen.
Hmm.
And you had access to things that you never had before. eBay changed the whole game of things. And then, when COVID hit, being able to do your auctions online.
I'm going to talk about that in a second, but I want to go back to one point. You have experience in this, Catherine, and I think you can offer a lot of new collectors something really tangible they can take away. If this new collector maybe is not getting the validation and support from their partner or spouse, close friends, what is your advice to them?
Get involved in the doll community. Back in the day, when I first started, it was clubs, and clubs were big back then. And there were a lot of clubs, thankfully. And we used to have regional events, and your clubs would have a bunch of events. And the doll shows, I mean, there were a lot of doll shows back then, especially in Southern California. But now there's this huge online community. No matter
Hmm.
what you collect, whether you want to be on an online general club or get into the genre, whether it's Madame Alexander or Smart Dolls or Stife with Bradley and the Barbie community. There's so many avenues now that are open for new collectors that weren't there
I
when I
get,
first started out.
I get all that, but what I'm struggling with, not struggling, but what I'm trying to convey to collectors is finding a path to where you get validation from the most important and direct aspect. We know we're going to get validation and community in clubs and online with like-minded people who are collecting the same thing. But how do you bring your spouse over? I know your husband, Eric, and he's supportive in this, but if someone has a spouse who's not supportive, and I think this is such a critical aspect, because I will tell you, if you have supportive partners behind your collecting, a supportive family, not into the dolls like you are, not actively collecting like you are, but just understanding and appreciating, A, the joy they bring you, and B, the history they represent. What is your advice?
It's $1 million question. Yeah, but that was a long, hard row that I hoed there. I mean, he tolerated it in the beginning, a little resentful of the money. We basically had a rule that as long as the checking account balance was at a certain amount, anything over was fair game. Because, I handled the money. He was like, just don't put us into debt. Just be smart about it. And for him, the change didn't come till this one auction. And we've talked about this before, where I sold off basically a third of my collection because the Margaret Hartshorn collection came up and she had a lot of early dolls. And there were some Chinas in there I wanted. I knew the only way I was going to be able to get it was if I sold. And so I made the decision, all right, these have just got to go. I'm going to do it. I'm going to bite the bullet and do it. So I sold a third of my collection, and I had a chunk of change that I went to that auction with. But back to where the story is, I always said that the dolls had monetary value, but he never really saw it till he saw the check from the dealer. And then it was like, oh.
It was real.
Okay, then.
It was real.
It was real. Oh, you can make money off of these. And I did make money off of those. And then when his parents died a few years later and he had this inheritance, he actually gave me money to go invest. And then it became hysterical. Some of the stories that I could tell after that was, I invested in this China doll that was only maybe 6 inches, but it was a really rare little wooden China doll with a bonnet and everything. And he says, that took all that money. And I said, it's not in the size. It's, trying to explain. And so he's learned over that. And then I think the big awakening too, because I tried for years to say that there's couples, it's not just old ladies, that men are actually involved, it's married couples. And he didn't really believe it till the first year I took him to convention with me and, Sharon Maggio. And we were standing in line waiting to go in, and her husband, John, came up and we were talking. He says, so what are you doing by your wife's dolls? He says, oh, I'm playing golf. I go, well, who are you playing golf with? And he says, just by myself. I said, hold on. Gave him Eric's phone number. And I said, I'm going to have my husband call you. You guys are going to play golf together. And they've had a bromance ever since. And they talk several times a year. Are you coming? The next year at convention, he came with me. And Alan Scott Pate walked into the restaurant. We were having lunch, and he was by himself. And I motioned him over, and he came, and he sat, and we were talking. And next thing you know, find out him and Alan were in the same business. That Alan, before he got into the whole Japanese dolls and that part of it, he used to be in water treatment, same as my husband. I left to go do an event, and they're still chatting at lunch and went on for another hour. But now he's made friends. He's gotten to know you over the last decade really well. I mean, instead of peripherally. And bringing him into the doll world has really helped. But it was a process. It wasn't something I wasn't doing at the beginning, but it took a while, but eventually getting him in there. And he's been very supportive the last 10 years.
And that's important to you as a collector, I would say, isn't it? Don't you feel?
Yes.
Or are you like, I don't care.
So.
I don't care if he likes it or not. But no, I think it is. I've been trying to drive this home to a lot of collectors when I speak at clubs and talk to them. And there's pushback where they're like, well, I don't really want my husband involved in this. This is my thing.
The old adage with the doll collectors is shopping with your husband for dolls is like bringing the game warden when you're hunting. You really don't want him there.
Okay, I've never heard that analogy before, but I'm writing that one down. That is a good one. Oh,
yeah, I've used that for years. I know this sounds terrible, but it is what it is. But, I'm the OG of skimming off the food budget to save money to go to the next doll show. And, when you come home, you drop a zero was the old adage. Whatever you paid, you dropped a zero.
Catherine, that's what is so fascinating about you as a collector, is how you started young and the longevity of you being in this market. You've had your feet in two different entirely
different worlds financially. Yeah.
Everything. 80s and 90s generation, especially the 80s. That was another world entirely. And you're right. It was skimming the grocery money.
Well, you joke at auctions about it small enough to bring home in your bag,
Yes, I'm sneaking dolls in the house. They were legitimately sneaking dolls in the house. That was the different generation. It's completely changed now. And that's why I think we've reached a point where having partners in your household is actually
a world of difference.
And it's benefiting collectors in building better collections and keeping them more active in collecting as well. So I think you had sage advice. And again, people have heard this from me, but hearing it from you is, I think, it resonates more. It brings a touch of your own experiences.
The other thing that changed too is my husband started coming to more of these things and being a little bit more involved. And he would watch for the first time me giving talks or going to events and having people talk to me, and not saying popularity, I don't know a better word, but just people greeting me and seeing, the respect that people had for me in the doll world and asking, or that I was judging, or I was involved in this and then becoming a regional director. And the one year, I think that's just hysterical that he was so proud. He was helping me bring dolls out from competition, and he was guarding the dolls as I would bring them out. And it just so happened I did really well that year, and all these blue ribbon dolls were coming out, and he was just preening, the ladies in line were, all those blue ribbons. And then I bring out the first doll that won a second place, and he exclaims, "What do you mean this doll got second place? She cost a lot of money." And I'm like, that's not how this works. That's not how any of this works. The women laughing and
but
lying,
that's how men work. We're competitive, and we want you to win the blue ribbon.
Yes. Yeah.
And so
he was preening until we insulted that doll with not giving her a blue ribbon. He had spent a lot of money on that doll. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Well, I know Eric, and I wanted to prompt you into talking a little bit about him and his evolution into your collecting, because I think it's helped you over the years. So taking a step back, in most of the interviews I do, I ask this question because I've always loved reading these in different newspapers over the years when they interview figures, personalities, politicians, athletes, and everything. If you could go back and write a letter to your younger self, that 21-year-old, 22-year-old collector, what would you tell her?
Gosh, not that I'd listen, but, I was really, how we all are young. We're so sure of ourselves. But hopefully if it was me, that maybe I might sit up and notice, because I obviously didn't listen to other people that tried to give me advice, because I just did what I did because people were there giving me advice. But if I went back and I'd actually listen to myself, I'd say, buy what you love. Don't look at that trend. Avoid worrying about the trends or what you think you should be collecting. Collect what you really want, what you love. And, stay away from the piddly, as we talked about before. Save up for that war chest. And stay tight and small, if that makes sense. It was a whole different collecting era of quantity is more, not necessarily quality. It was the quantity back then. And tell myself to buy the quality, not worry about that your collection isn't as big as these other, when they walk into the house, that you feel like you had to have a lot there in order to be considered a collector. I actually had a friend, and I should have listened to her, where she said, I'd rather have 10 really great dolls than 100 so-so. And that would be the best advice I'd give myself, to have listened to Karen and done what she did in her collecting. I'd have 10 really great dolls and don't get the 11th until it's the 11th great doll of whatever you're buying. That in the long run, you'll benefit yourself more by just buying the best of what you can afford. And if you can't afford it, keep saving until you can. And be okay coming home empty.
Would you warn her, don't do this? Or would you say, you are about to enter into one of the most incredible rides of your life?
It's so hard to say, because there was a point in my life that, thank goodness, I had all of those dolls, because I went through a very nasty divorce. The point where there's no child support, no alimony. And if I hadn't had that collection to sell off, there wouldn't have been a roof over mine and the kids' heads and food on the table. It's what kept us alive for those years. So in a sense, it saved me. So it's so hard to do that 2020 hindsight Monday morning quarterbacking thing when if I had done the 10 great dolls, all right, maybe I would have had the 10 great dolls that I could have sold, but at the same time, would I have been willing to part with them? Would I have found other means? But I had the dolls to sell. I mean, there's just so many if ands. It's really hard to second guess, but I think overall, maybe not had the $100, maybe 50, scale back a little,
But you've had a heck of a ride with this. There's been so many iterations of your collection and so many evolutions of you as a person through this collecting. And I think it's all connected. As I've known you for so many years, I've watched it and it's all connected. And I know, and I guess you can confirm to me because we've talked about it, there have been these moments in your life when not just the dolls that you were able to sell them when you were desperate at one point through a divorce, as you called it, and then times when you've had difficult moments in your life when those dolls were there for you and they gave you solace.
Yeah.
They gave you comfort.
The last 5 years, as you know, I had 2 life-threatening illnesses and major life-threatening surgeries. And it was what kept me going because I couldn't get out of the house. I was in too much pain. I was bedridden. It was being able to sew for the dolls and having that online community that I could still connect with because I couldn't get out of the house. I couldn't go. It made all the difference. And for a lot of people during the pandemic, it was our lifeline. Where other people were going stir crazy by being in the house. I had my dolls, I had my sewing, I had my doll groups, I had the online auctions. You guys had those fireside chats. I was good to go.
A life of purpose and in something you love is a life well lived. And you have been incredible in demonstrating this to people and inspiration. And if you're listening to this and you're not a collector and you're wondering why do people collect, Catherine's testimonial, her experience in this should reach into your heart, not to make you a collector, but to understand it more and to see how important this is to 40% of Americans identify as being collectors and what this means to them. So thank you, Catherine, for sharing very personal stories and your experiences on this that I think will help so many different levels of people understand things better coming from you. You're a remarkable person and you have done remarkable things with your collecting. When it wasn't always easy, you had blood, sweat, and tears. You worked for it. And all that you've contributed to the community in the world of dolls. And I want to thank you for being here today. You're an amazing guest. Any last words you want to say?
Like you said, it's been a wild ride. And I look back over these decades and I'm so grateful to have found this collecting genre. There's all kinds of things people could collect. And as you talked about, there's community no matter what you collect. But the friendships that I have made through this, and when I was diagnosed with breast cancer, the doll community that came out for me, who sustained me through that, who sent flowers and gifts, who called, who checked in on me. And I got breast cancer at the height of COVID. I couldn't have visitors. I was alone. And my poor husband was by himself trying to nurse me. But it was the doll community who checked in to make sure that I was okay, that he was okay. I never had a big sister. I was the oldest. And Deborah, love her to pieces. She's the big sister I never had. I call her and I can talk to her. The sense of community has just sustained me over the years. It's gotten me through, like I said, the divorce, the moves, the illnesses, whatever. The doll community has been there. And then just having the dolls to play with, to sew for, to rearrange. It's so fulfilling.
It's therapeutic.
It's on so many levels and fed my passion for history, for fashion. I couldn't have landed in a better area to have collected. So I've collected other things over the years, side things that I've done, but nothing has given me the satisfaction that the dolls have lasted the longest. And the friendships that I've made, they have lasted longer than school friendships, family, they have become family. So as well as you and your family and the Theriault family has been family over the years, have taken care of me in several ways over the years that I am eternally grateful for. So,
And I made you cry once.
oh, you've made me cry on several occasions, but that's the only
Catherine
one.
Peterson. Thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for
very welcome.
Again,
Thank you for having me.
You've been wonderful, and we'll see you out in the world of collecting more, I'm sure. Take care. Thank you so much.
Yes, you're very welcome.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of The Curious Collector. The Curious Collector is hosted by Stuart Holbrook and produced by Tammy Trujillo. We invite you to follow us on social media and feel free to leave any questions you have for Stuart on Facebook at Stuart Holbrook-Theriault or follow the Theriault Company Facebook page. And you can stay up to date with the latest auctions and events at Theriaults.com. We'll talk to you on the next episode of The Curious Collector.